Did you know that Max Verstappen took pole position at Silverstone with a virtually uncontrollable car? What seemed like a technical stroke of genius ended up revealing a deeper problem that could change his future with Red Bull. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Verstappen is losing confidence in his team? Is Red Bull losing control of its own championship car? In this video, we'll break down the most striking technical data from the 2025 British GP, a race that showcased both the best and worst of Red Bull and Verstappen. To understand the real impact of what happened to Max Verstappen at the 2025 British Grand Prix, you have to start at the beginning. What happened that weekend at Silverstone wasn't just a failed practice session or a surprise qualifying. It was a technical transformation that exposed the real cracks in the Red Bull empire. The worrying thing is that this wasn't a new situation in 2025. Red Bull has faced a pattern of erratic behavior with the RB21 since the opening races of the season. The car's operating window is so narrow that any small change in temperature, wind, or fuel level dramatically affects its performance. At Silverstone, that weakness was fully exposed. But what really marked a turning point was how the team reacted between Friday and Saturday. A complete transformation of the aerodynamic setup carried out against the clock that completely altered the way the car handled on track. It was a desperate, but calculated gamble. And for many, the fact that it resulted in a pole position is not just a testament to Verstappen's talent, but a sign of how fragile Red Bull's current balance is. From the outside, everything seemed back to normal when Verstappen achieved that perfect lap in qualifying. But behind that pole lay a much more complicated story. A story of extreme technical risk, of decisions that contradicted aerodynamic logic and that, while they worked in a very specific context, guaranteed absolutely nothing for Sunday. The story of the British GP cannot be understood without this initial context. A team forced to improvise, a driver forced to adapt to the limit, and a result that, while superficially brilliant, left many more questions than answers. The night from Friday to Saturday at Silverstone was anything but peaceful for Red Bull. What unfolded in those hours was a high-stakes technical operation in which every decision could save or completely ruin Max Verstappen's weekend. And it wasn't a minor modification. Red Bull didn't just fine-tune the car, they redesigned it. They transformed it from the ground up in a time frame that would take other teams days to execute. The key was in the aerodynamics. Red Bull opted for a radical setup, completely opposite to what had been seen in practice. The team decided to eliminate rear downforce and opt for a larger front wing. This combination, in theory, makes no sense on a circuit like Silverstone, which relies on stability in fast corners and traction in slow corners. But Red Bull did it, and the data confirmed it. Telemetry analysis afterwards showed Verstappen reaching up to 313 kilometers per hour on the main straight, for more than Oscar Piastri, who until that moment seemed to have the most competitive car of the weekend. This difference is no small detail. In modern Formula One, where everything is measured in thousandths of a second, beating your rivals by several kilometers per hour on the straight is a huge advantage. But this speed didn't come for free. The RB21 became extremely difficult to handle. With less rear downforce, the car became unstable under braking and changes of direction. Red Bull, by making this overnight transformation, demonstrated two things very clearly. First, its technical ability to react under pressure. No other team has the structure or confidence to make such a drastic modification in such a short time. And second, its level of desperation. Making such a decision implies knowing that there are no traditional alternatives that work. This change was all or nothing. If Verstappen couldn't adapt to the car's new balance, he would fall in the standings. But the result was surprising, a perfect qualifying lap that gave him pole position. It was brilliant, no doubt, but it was also fragile. The setup worked under very specific conditions: a dry track, stable temperature, and no traffic. Any alteration to that balance would ruin everything. And that was the big risk. Because what Red Bull won on Saturday, it called into question on Sunday. The aerodynamic strategy worked in only one scenario. In all the others, it was a trap disguised as a solution. A move that may seem brilliant, but leaves you defenseless if something changes. And in Formula One, things always change. Comparative telemetric data between Verstappen and Oscar Piastri in Q3 showed something that, for many engineers in the paddock, was as fascinating as worrisome. In high-speed curves, such as Kopp's or the Maggots-Beckett's complex, Verstappen was devastating. The speed difference was clear, at some points, up to 8 kilometers per hour faster than the McLaren. That difference, in terms of Formula One, is huge. And not only that, it was directly translated into the advantage of time. Only in that sequence of fast curves, Verstappen took almost 0.3 of a second. In a circuit like Silverstone, that can make the difference between a pole and leave from the second row. But where the story begins to change is in the areas of medium and low speed. In curves such as the Loop, Brooklands, and Lovefield, the advantage disappeared. And not only disappeared, it was reversed. There, the McLaren of Piastri showed greater stability, better traction in the output, and a higher minimum speed. Because the Red Bull configuration, when sacrificing rear aerodynamic load, simply did not have enough support in those technical areas. The car was fast in the right, but nervous, almost unstable, when it had to stop strong or change direction in close spaces. Another key point that revealed the data was the way Red Bull depended completely on DRS, the drag reduction system. With the rear wing so small, the RB21 did not generate enough support in normal conditions. But when activating the DRS, they gained a significant advantage in overtaking areas, an advantage that Verstappen knew how to exploit in classification, but that would have little value if the race was complicated. In addition, telemetry showed a pattern that technicians know well: the faster the section, the better the car. The more technical or slow, the more he suffered. That is also reflected in tire data. In simulated long batches, the degradation was superior to that of its rivals. Under normal career conditions, that means losing between 2 and 0.3 for return only for wear. And that, in a long race, cannot be hidden with any strategy. Finally, the data also alerted about a detail that many overlooked: wind sensitivity. In each microcambio in the direction, or wind speed, the behavior of the car varied more than expected. It is not a minor fact. Silverstone is known for its unpredictable cross currents. A car that does not react well to these conditions becomes a nightmare for the pilot, and Verstappen made it clear later in his own words. The car was fast, yes, but it was difficult. Very difficult. In summary, the telemetric data confirmed something essential. Red Bull did not find a magical solution. He found a functional, but highly specialized configuration, one that could only survive in a specific context. Saturday's classification had been an impressive technical and personal achievement, but what nobody imagined was what would come just 20-4 hours later. On Sunday, the rain made its appearance in Silverstone, and with it, chaos unleashed. What for other teams represented a change of conditions, for Red Bull a sentence was directly. The same aerodynamic configuration that had led them to pole position was now transformed into a nightmare. From the first round, the RB21 showed alarming symptoms. Verstappen, who had started in the front, could not maintain rhythm or stability. The car simply did not respond. He moved nervously in each curve, slid in the braking, and lost traction in the outputs. Any advantage that would have achieved dry disappeared under the drops of water. Every kilometer that advanced the race, the RB21 seemed to crumble more. The strategy of low aerodynamic load, which had given results in ideal conditions, became an insurmountable wet. The lack of rear support not only hindered the control of the car, but accelerated the degradation of intermediate tires. While McLaren and other rivals maintained rhythm and took care of their compounds, Verstappen saw how theirs worn back after return. In less than 15 turns, the difference was abysmal. Internal radios revealed the level of frustration. When Verstappen was asked about what happened, his response was clear and dry. Not with that spoiler. There were no rodeos. There were no excuses. Only one finding: the car was not in a position to compete in the rain. And it was not a simple lack of performance. It was a design that did not contemplate any tolerance to the unpredictable. During the rest of the race, the story was repeated. Each attempted Verstappen for recovering positions was limited by the instability of the car. I couldn't stop late. I could not accelerate with confidence. And the most serious, he could not defend himself or attack in DRS areas where he had previously been dominant. The same RB21 that had been a surgical tool on Saturday became a load on Sunday. The disappointment was evident in Red Bull. What could have been a victory, or at least one podium, ended in collateral damage. The technical commitment had worked in a single moment of the weekend. But like any risky bet, its margin of error was minimal. And when the unforeseen event arrived, when the rain fell, there was no backing plan. The subsequent analysis revealed that the degradation of intermediate tires was 20% higher in the Verstappen car compared to the McLaren. In career terms, that means losing tenths every return, without real possibility of recovery. What was thought of as an offensive strategy ended up being a trap, an error that no one inside the team could avoid. When the full weekend data in Silverstone is analyzed, there is something that is obvious beyond the obvious. And it is not just the trunk of Verstappen, nor the loud fall from the second position. What really worries engineers, analysts, and Red Bull himself are the deep signals that the numbers reveal about the future of this team. What seemed like a circumstantial situation begins to seem structural. And that is much more dangerous. The RB21, the car with which Red Bull sought to reaffirm his domain, has proven to be an extremely sensitive machine. The data shows that its performance depends on a technical window so narrow that the ambient temperature is barely diverted or the fuel levels are slightly altered, and the entire balance of the car falls apart. This is not a simple question of setup. It is a background weakness. And the most worrying thing is that the team knows. Pierre Watch, the technical director of Red Bull, admitted it without surroundings. They no longer completely trust the simulation tools. That phrase is a bomb. When an elite team recognizes that their virtual data no longer reflects what happens on the track, it means they are flying blindly. And in modern Formula One, where everything is decided in tenths of a second, that can make the difference between glory and irrelevance. Silverstone data, in summary, are not an isolated episode. They are a warning, an alert that indicates that Red Bull is no longer marking the rhythm, but trying to follow it. That Verstappen no longer has a dominant car, but one conditioned. The doubts that arose in Silverstone are not erased with a good classification. On the contrary, they deepen when the results are not sustainable. The fact that Red Bull had to redesign the car completely to get a quick lap in classification, and then that same car became unmanageable, a few drops of rain fell, it shows that the balance of the RB21 hangs from a thread. And when the performance of a team depends on perfect conditions, what you have is not an advantage, it is a latent threat. In that context, Verstappen is not only fighting rivals on the track, he is also dealing with a technical environment that no longer gives guarantees. And now I ask you, was this just a stumbling block or a sign of something bigger? Do not forget to subscribe to the channel.